Hello. Welcome everyone to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation series online. I'm Will Hopkins. I'm the director of New Hampshire Peace Action. If you're new to our organization, we educate, mobilize, and organize to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. The corona pandemic spurred us to start this conversation series almost 2 years ago now as a way to continue our public education work. And we've found it to be such an effective way to do our outreach that we've decided to continue on indefinitely. Not that the corona pandemic has shown any signs of slowing anytime recently. But this bi-weekly online conversation series is intended to help us engage and sort out how to make the changes we've been yearning for. In the spirit of understanding and respect, we'd like to acknowledge that we're doing our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. And we want to honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they have been stewarding throughout the generations that have been stolen. So tonight, I'm going to be our presenter. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the first year of the Biden presidency has held in foreign policy, and what we think our priorities might be going into the next year. I'm hoping not to take a ton of time with speaking at you, and want to take some time to ask you questions about how we do this work together. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. So organizationally, we at the beginning of the corona pandemic, we started our strategic planning process under the Executive Service Corps, and we developed a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. And that process, I think, went really, really well. And we have a really great plan moving forward. One of the things that we talked about a lot is the ways that what Arnie, who I can see is with us from Oaxaca, calls military Keynesianism, has kind of stacked this system against us. We nationally, but especially here in New Hampshire, are dependent on federal dollars that flow into Pentagon manufacturing as a source of jobs, and kind of as a form of social uplift. And what that means is that we have both political parties really firmly situated in a position where they are supporting investment in violence as a primary responsibility. And I think you can see that in the advertisements of our current office holders, and you can see it on the Hill. And that, as we know, I mean, it'll be 13 years that I've been at New Hampshire Peace Action come September, if we're still here in September. And not the organization, just generally Earth. And one of the things that I've noticed is that it's hard to feel like we're moving the ball forward in meaningful ways. So today, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about what the last year has held for us and what we're hoping we can work on over the next year. And I also want to use this presentation in this hour to take some time to talk to you, our members, about what it is you would like to see us working on, and maybe get some insight from you about how we can be more strategic in our work. So we have our annual boards retreat at the tail end of January. Every year our boards get together and we decide how we're going to adjust our plan or how we're going to work through the course of the year. And after that discussion, Amy Antonucci, who chairs our events committee, who's on today and is going to help me facilitating the Q&A after I'm done talking is going to facilitate a program. And hopefully at that point, we've been through our board's retreat and we should be able to kind of come back and say, this is what we talked to you about. This is what we developed at our board's retreat. And here's how we're going to move that forward. And Amy may take it in a bunch of different directions. I'm really looking forward to that, that hour. But I definitely want to make sure we take some time to hear how you think we can best work together to accomplish something of meaning. So the strategic plan, which I talked about last year, if you were with us or if you've been involved, is kind of, I would say, half on track and half behind. We lost a keyboard member, has an illness, and we're hoping she'll be back. But she was heavily involved in making sure that the strategic plan stayed on track. Some of what has stayed on track is that we are in a hiring process, moving towards hiring a digital media specialist. We've got a group of 5 or 6 finalists who are really look like dynamite to me. I'm really excited to work. I'd be excited to work with any of them. We hope to be making that hire sometime later in January. We've fully developed a system of a way of thinking about how we do this work called pillars. And these pillars are, some of them are the things that are at the core of our mission and how we do the work. And some of those pillars are adjacent issues that we feel need to be woven in. Things like climate change, where we understand that the military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels on Earth. And we also understand that a lot of US foreign policy is about control of fossil fuels. And so the climate movement, their work needs to be woven directly into us. And so we have a pillar on how that connects. The same goes for racism in the Black Lives Matter movement, understanding that we go to war in places where brown-skinned people live and their lives aren't as important, and that's why it's okay to go to war there, and that's international racism and militarized international racism we call war, and domestic racism we call policing, I think is a fair statement. The police state as it is, which does very similar militarized violence against communities of color in this country. And the difference between what Black Lives Matter does and what we do is just the location, trying to protect the lives of people who are hurt by a militarized government forces is really similar work. And so developing those pillars is something that I think we've done that's really powerful. I'm pleased to report that after a year, both our membership and list are growing in the ways we'd hoped it would in the strategic plan, which, nothing in a strategic plan can move forward if you don't have those things lining up. So I'm really glad to say that those are moving in the direction we wanted, but we are behind in a few areas. And some of those include our board. We've lost some members and we haven't picked up, not only have we not picked up numbers of board members, we've also not diversified, which was one of the primary goals of our strategic plan, figuring out how we get a board that's not middle-aged to older white people. And that even, it goes as far as we don't have a lot of LGBTQ representation on our boards. We're a pretty homogenous, older white group as far as our decision-making body. And so that's something we really want to focus on. Another thing that is behind that we haven't been keeping up within that strategic plan is getting other organizations to include some sort of messaging around Pentagon spending or war making in their agendas. And that's kind of a lot of the bigger progressive groups are still really avoiding talking about these issues. And so I feel like we've done a respectable job, and we definitely have room to improve in kind of sticking to that. One of the things over the last year that I've been super proud of our organization for, and in particular my events committee, is this conversation series. I feel like it's been really positive. We've had amazing speakers, and the speakers have really represented those pillars, how we think about foreign policy and Pentagon spending as part of a larger movement to value the inherent worth and dignity of each person, regardless of where they're born or what the color of their skin is. And I think this conversation series has been really effective in that. It's also been really well attended. It's been a great way to pull people together. So lobbying has been tough in person, obviously. And I think over the last year, I have definitely not had the time to connect with our representative staffers as much as I'd like. We have had a good swell in the number of people who are calling on legislation, and the number of bills that we've been able to get people engaged on. So I think that lobbying has been a mixed bag, but it's been good. A place where I definitely need more support. We'd like to be putting effort into putting together some curriculum to offer through a program called Learn Everywhere, which it's for those of you who are alarmed to hear that we want to offer curriculum through this. It's a program that was pushed through by the funding from the Koch brothers. It is definitely intentionally designed to undermine public education, but at the same time, it is an avenue by which we can talk to young people. And I think with the passage of the divisive concepts legislation that came through the legislature this year, offering in particular US history and perhaps electives around peacemaking is something that our organization can do, that we have an avenue to offer something that's never been offered before, and something that is desperately needed in this moment. So that's a place where I think we've got a small group of people working on it, but what we need is people who know how to write curriculum and who can put in some time helping us develop that sort of thing. So I also want to talk about our organizational footprint as it applies to kind of work that you don't necessarily associate with our core program. Our core program has for a long time just been our boards and Doreen and I working together on foreign policy, but our organization actually is much larger than that. 350 New Hampshire, which I think at this point has about 6 or 7 staff working for it. Everybody who their bank account is in New Hampshire Peace Action's name. We're the 501c3. Their paychecks come from New Hampshire Peace Action. Bill and I serve on their steering committee. So part of our work has been supporting that growing organization, which is now, when it started, it was one quarter-time staff person, and it's now I believe the largest climate group in the state, and they're way bigger than we are, and pursuing their own 501c3 status. And we expect by the end of this year, they'll actually be their own organization. We also served as a pass-through for some fundraising for a youth refugee camp in Jordan. This is mostly for Palestinian orphans, and it educates, provides food and medical care. And there was a fundraising campaign during Ramadan, primarily in New York City, and we acted as the 501c3 sponsor for that. We are currently picking up Black Lives Matter Nashua as a partner, and that's a New Hampshire nonprofit that, again, doesn't have its own 501c3 status, and we're hoping to help support them until they are a 501c3. So this year, while our core budget, we spent less than $90,000 for Doreen and I in our core program, the full organization is going to come in a little north of $600,000 in work between all those different projects. So it's been a big year. We've certainly never, as an organization, had that kind of we've never had that kind of reporting responsibility to the IRS of that kind of large amount of money that's moving through. But we've just felt that it was really important for us to be there to support these other organizations as they grow, as part of our thinking of our issue as part of a constellation of things that need to change to value human life. The next part, I want to talk about what's happened on the national stage over the last year. I think organizationally, we've got a lot to be proud of, and we still have a lot of work to do. On the policy, in the policy arena, there's not a lot of positive to report. There are some things that have happened over the last year that have been good, but I'm going to open with some of the bad stuff. And the first is the National Defense Authorization Act. President Biden signed that into law 8 days ago. It's the largest military spending bill that's ever been passed. Came in at about $768.2 billion, just a colossal amount of money. It passed with the support of all 4 of New Hampshire's representatives. The language in it, unfortunately, there were some provisions that we'd hoped would be part of that bill that were stripped out. I'll talk a little more about some of that in a little bit. It also increased over last year. For those of you who don't follow nuclear weapons, there's been launched under President Obama what folks on Capitol Hill are calling the new Cold War, a massive investment in our nuclear infrastructures. We're rebuilding all of our launch vehicles and the systems that carry nuclear warheads, and a lot of the internal systems of the nuclear warheads themselves. And that's slotted to spend about to cost about 1.7 trillion over its 30-year upgrade. And that NDA also increased over last year's budget by about 1 billion, the amount we're spending rebuilding and improving our nuclear arsenal. And there's kind of a backdrop to that. We're seeing really, really inflammatory language over the Ukraine. We had James Inhofe, who's the ranking Republican on Senate Foreign Relations, and Senator Roger Wicker have both openly said that if Russia continues to be belligerent on the border with the Ukraine, that we should use nuclear strikes, just openly advocating for nuclear strikes against Russia, which, make no mistake, any Russian nuclear submarine, which remain hidden from us largely, has the potential to usher in a nuclear winter that would kill the vast majority of people on Earth. So, what they're talking about is essentially ending the world, because they're displeased with Russia, and I think that Biden's continuance, he's continuing to trust Victoria Nuland, who was the Eastern Europe head for the State Department under President Obama, and has been promoted to deputy I think it's Undersecretary of State for Public Policy, is still calling the shots on that. And Victoria Nuland, unfortunately, is a person who has her husband, her brothers, and most of her close connections are people who either work for military contractors or pro-war think tanks, the folks who try to dream up new wars. And she's an open neoconservative who believes that U.S. military dominance is the key to the future of humanity. So she's a pretty scary person to be calling most of the shots, and she continues to fill that role as the trusted expert on policy for the Ukraine and Eastern Europe. So kind of a lot of bad news when it comes to that. Russia has sent a number of troops to the border there, and right now that situation is, with the possible exception of India and Pakistan, the most dangerous place on Earth as far as the potential for nuclear war. And I think most of you know that there are plenty of people in the establishment, including former Secretary of Defense William Perry, who believe that that things are as likely to get out of control now as they ever were during the Cold War. So I think the reality that we have a senior Democrat on Senate Foreign Relations, Jeanne Shaheen, here in New Hampshire, is important, and that as an organization, we should be prioritizing communicating with Jeanne Shaheen's office regularly about the need for restraint over the Ukraine and not starting a nuclear war. We've talked a little about China, and unfortunately, of the priorities we work on, China is the one that I feel like I know the least about. And we had 2 programs on China over the last year. One of them, I felt like it had a lot of information that was counter to what I have learned, and was hard for me to digest because it was difficult. And the other program, unfortunately, our speaker had internet issues, and we've been unable to fix that presentation and really get anything out of it. We do on February 14th, Valentine's Day coming right up, have Joseph Gerson coming, and he's a person who I trust to kind of demystify the situation in the South China Sea and help us understand U.S.-China relations. What we know for sure, what I can say from what I do know, is that we continue to see bipartisan villainization of China, and that the new Cold War, that the last Cold War was primarily the U.S. and Russia, and that China, while they have far fewer warheads, they've also embarked in upgrading all of their delivery vehicles, and they're fully engaged in this round of the Cold War. So hopefully Joseph can help us to think about China a little better when he's on in a bit. Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the Middle East. I want to open by talking a little bit about the Afghanistan withdrawal, which it's hard to believe that was just this year. This has been a really long year in my mind. That withdrawal was sloppy. It was not executed well. And the U.S. still has a lot of sanctions that are killing ordinary people in Afghanistan, and we are still not accepting refugees on anything near the scale that we ought to be, considering the role that we played in creating that situation. There are a lot of people who cooperated with the U.S. who have been killed and are still at risk of being killed, and we need to continue to advocate for people who are caught in our bad policy decisions, to have a safe place to come. And I think it's a humanitarian crisis that we made, that we're not doing what we need to do as a nation to make amends. And that for me, I think not only should we not be putting sanctions, we really need to be paying reparations to the Afghan people for what we've done, and we certainly need to be letting people who worked with us into this country so that they have a safe place to live. People who put their trust in this nation over the past 20 years of warfare deserve safety and a place to live. So Yemen, in February 4th, 2021, Joe Biden gave his first major foreign policy speech, and a lot of us who have followed Yemen, which remains the largest humanitarian crisis on earth, we're seeing most years, it's very hard to know because aid workers can't get into Yemen, but they think between the cholera epidemic and starvation, about 100,000 children are dying every year under the Saudi-led blockade. And I was really happy to hear in February, Joe Biden announced he was ending U.S. support for the Saudi-led war and blockade in Yemen. that seemed to be playing out pretty well through most of the year. But 8 days ago, he signed that NDAA, and one of the provisions that was stripped out of the final version was the one limiting those funds and transfer of arms to Saudi Arabia. And so it looks like the budget he signed included a resumption of that support. I haven't heard anybody say that's the way it's going to go down, but that was in the budget. So that's a really, it's a sad thing to consider. When I looked at that, I mean, I knew that the stripping out of that language, there was a discussion on the Peace Action Affiliates listserv about something about the Pulse Light nightclub, which I guess there was something in the bill about Pulse nightclub, and someone was upset about that. And I thought 60,000 Yemeni kids will die because we resumed our support of the Saudi-led occupation, if that's how things play out. And that's a Pulse nightclub shooting every few hours in Yemen. And I remember just being appalled at that, and that our representatives didn't stand up and make sure that that was stripped from the bill is upsetting. We still have Iran and North Korea. It seems like Biden has primarily moved back to what was the Obama era term? Was it strategic neglect? There hasn't been major movement on either one. I do think it's good that we now have some sort of diplomatic relations with North Korea, and I'd like to see a president engage with them and start talking about how we move forward. I don't know that that's going to happen. Israel-Palestine, again, I don't think we saw a significant change between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. The funding hasn't changed in any substantive way. There was an extra $1 billion. In May, there was a bombing campaign that led to about 200 civilians, a couple dozen combatants killed in Palestine. And about 2,000 people injured in that bombing campaign. And Joe Biden was a key part of rushing through $1 billion in new missiles to refresh the Israeli supply after that. So again, we're seeing not significant changes. The embassy was moved to Tel Aviv under Trump, or was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and it's remaining in Jerusalem. So I was listening to a Veterans for Peace podcast a few weeks ago, and they said the buzz was that Biden would be Obama 2.0, but it seems like instead it's going to be Trump 2.0. And I don't know that that's completely accurate. I do know that the numbers as far as when we talk about intersectionality, one of the things that I know I care about a lot is the crisis on our border, on our southern border, and that there was a huge increase in the number of people on our border who have been detained, deported. That family separation has continued, although it's not publicly punitive. The homestead facility was reopened, which is something that we actually activists managed to close under President Trump. It's now, I think it's called Homestead. I may have that name wrong. Somebody can correct me. But I think, there was a lot of hope that Biden would be a major change. And I think when it comes to foreign policy and respect for the lives of people who weren't born in the United States, not to say nothing of his social agenda here at home, we've seen the same kind of callous disregard that we saw under the Trump administration. That Vets for Peace, I remember feeling anger when I heard that on the Vets for Peace podcast. This, it's not Obama 2.0, it's Trump 2.0. And I was like, well, that's not true. And, the end of the Afghanistan war, but there is a lot of continuity of policy that is really disappointing. So that's all I wanted to open with, and that was about a half of our time together. In conversation today, I actually want to go a little bit differently than we usually do. As you know, it's usually a facilitated conversation between the speaker and the audience here, but I actually have questions for you, and I'd like to post those in the chat. And as you respond to these questions, I'll read them aloud as well once they're in the chat. As you respond to these questions, you can do so in the chat. Although I'd much, in this case, I think it's a good time to unmute and jump and speak to us. But if you're shy, feel free to post in the chat. But what I'm hoping for is that everybody can open with your name. And I'd also like for you to try to articulate what it is that has inspired you to connect with New Hampshire Peace Action, why you're here tonight, and what inspires you to be engaged in this work. Judy, the recording will be on Facebook and YouTube, and I will send you the link once we've got it on YouTube. So there are my, sorry for the opening letters. I was following an outline, and that's where my questions are. So the questions that I have for you: how do you think we could do this work more effectively? What other issues would you like to see us working on? Which of the issues I've talked about do you think we should prioritize? What do you think would inspire you to get more involved? What do you want our boards to be thinking about or taking into consideration as we go into our annual strategic retreat to plan for 2022? And again, if you're willing to respond to any of these questions, and they're open to everyone, open with your name and try to articulate what it inspires you to connect or why you want to be engaged in this work.
Well,
don't be shy.
See them in the chat. Are you going to put them in chat too?
I sent them just to Judy. Everybody else has to remember, Judy only gets the questions. There they are. Sorry about that. So yeah, and I'm just going to go up. I know there were a few comments in the chat earlier. So control for minerals needed for non-fossil fuels, lithium, and Arnie, I think that that's a great point. There are a lot of things: lithium, cobalt, bauxite. There are other reasons why we move into different regions and start wars, and I think Afghanistan, we talk about the Caspian pipeline sometimes, but there's also a reality that we knew there was about $1.5 trillion in gold and iron, bauxite, cobalt, and lithium in northern Afghanistan at the beginning of that war as well. And so I think that we've already seen that a lot of wars are about control of some of those. That energy is a big thing in dictating our foreign policy right now. All right, we've got David in here. Not just foreign policy, nickel on native lands. Once again, pitting of national interests against indigenous rights. Yeah. Go ahead, Deborah.
I'm Deborah Aframala, and for me, I think Peace Action really needs to work harder in diversifying. It is not something that you can put off anymore, because we're at a place where if we do not unify our organizations, we will not win. We're being out-organized by the right, using our own playbook. That's what really aggravates me, but we're not doing it. So if we're not unifying with the different organizations across the board, we're going to still be having these conversations 30 years from now. And so I would encourage Peace Action to really seek that diversity and to seek ways. You have done a fantastic job of doing that, but actually bringing out your base, everybody's base, in a unified way, so that they can see strength and not just individual organizations coming out on their big issue.
Can I ask what does that look like? For me, I feel like this is something I've been working on and trying to do for a long time. I mean, we've been working on it. We've been working in this together for a few years, Deborah, and I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't know how, and I've never known how to change that.
I think um, I think first of all, I cannot be the monolithic Black person that sits on every board. Okay, I just do not have that um, capability. Um, but I think putting it to different organizations, the connections that we have. Um, I'm looking at RAD. I'm looking at, GSOP. Everybody keeps their list a little secret, but to say we need to come together in a more meaningful way. And do you have somebody who's willing to work on climate with us, or so that you have that reach? But it concerns me because we're too siloed.
And what you're talking about, that's a huge part of our strategic plan, right? Like, how do we break that down and move forward? And I feel like we've worked really hard on trying to, our pillars format. We've made sure to have a number of people come speak in the conversation series about issues that are relevant to diverse populations. We've done the work of trying to connect foreign policy to that. And I just don't know I don't know how to reach a little further to make that connection you're talking about. I don't know that again, as you said, you're not a monolithic Black person, but it's been hard, and I don't know that anybody has all the answers to it. But I deeply appreciate you talking about it with us, Deborah. Your counsel on it is valuable.
I think I'm at the place where you have to ask. We're great at having conversations, and we have great relationships is with one another, but we don't say. I don't say to you, Will, I love you, but you need 10 of your people to come to this action. And we don't build those type of relationships. And if you don't ask, you don't. I'm finding out you don't get, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate that. So I'm just going to read Betsy's comment off. So I think that hiring a young tech person is a step in the right direction. Will help with diversification and intersectionality. I hope you're right, Betsy. So again, I just want to Bill, how do we make defense spending and the connection between militarism and growing fascism known among a wider cross section of our allies? We do a lot of preaching to the choir, and there's it's one of the things that somebody said choirs need practice too, and that is a big part of how we keep things together. But how do we get that message in front of other groups? Deborah, go ahead.
Okay, this is just what I've been learning. You have to intersectional. You have to put your pillars in a way, and your issues, like defense spending, into their issues. How does it make it change for the better? I'm beginning to bring to the disability community. They're spending all this money on defense, but we don't have workforce. So if they spend less money on the defense, and we will still have a good military, we will have some of these XYZ problems that we're issuing. So I mean, it's really talking their language, not just your own.
Yeah, and we've definitely that's been part of our strategy for years, but I think we need to do a better job executing it. There was a campaign called Move the Money that was all about making those connections, talking about the specific trade-offs, what we were giving up in different fields, and different parts of our country that need to be developed. What would it cost to put solar on every house? What would it cost to ensure medical care for every person? What would it cost to build back our roads and bridges? And how does that translate into Pentagon projects? And that's impactful if you can get those numbers in front of people, and as you said, speak their language. So thank you. So I'm going to jump. David, go ahead.
Hi, this is David Blair. I remember, I think it was back when Obama was first running, that something called the Priorities Project, something of that nature, had a disc, a really simple pie chart, but it was a physical thing that you could produce and pop out. It actually expanded. It was pretty cool. That this was only one of several very graphic ways that the huge portion of defense spending in our national budget could be communicated. And because it was a thing that could be easily shown, it made an impact on me to see it. There was also a car that went around with something on the top that, again, showed the huge disproportionate amount of defense spending. So I'm thinking that something graphic and simple that can help when we're with groups, when we're with our allies, that this is just a way of communicating very quickly and effectively, I think, the share of defense spending in our national budget.
So, David, this is the Priorities New Hampshire pen, and there's the pullout. That's Pentagon spending lined up next to children's health care, K-12 education, humanitarian foreign aid, job training, and reduced reliance on federal oil. Just to say how long ago it's actually not that long ago. It was 646 back then, so 150 billion less. But there's that, and then the pie chart. I think all of us had one on our cars back then because Ben and Jerry's gave you free ice cream for it. So. Yeah, thank you, David. Judy, go ahead. Judy?
Yeah, Arnie's talking in the other room, so I think I'll put my notes in the chat.
Sure.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and if you want to, folks, again, you're free to put your questions in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. You can also, if you don't know how to use the hand raise function, you can just put an asterisk in the chat, and I'll call on you. And I'm just going to read off the questions while I'm going to read, Lydia, I'm going to get your comment in just a second. Let me read off our questions again, and I'll come back. So the questions I'm hoping that we can get some help with moving forward. How do you think we can do this work more effectively? What issues would you like to see us working on that maybe we're not? Which of these issues that I've talked about do you think we should prioritize? What would inspire you to get more involved? And what do you want our boards to be thinking about or taking into consideration as we go into our strategic planning for 2022? Betsy, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, I guess this falls under the category of doing our work more effectively, and also the intersectionality, with allies. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the CIA that came out earlier this year saying that identifying the greatest threats to US national security as being climate change and domestic terrorism, or however you want to term it, extremist domestic violence from extremists, and also, of course, the pandemic. So there we have an easy way automatically to intersect with, the climate movement right off the bat, but also in terms of defense spending, it's like complete amnesia. That report came out and then I didn't hear anything more about it. And, when they're talking about the NDAA, it's totally not based on our true threats. It's based on the military industrial complex and, keeping the money flowing where it always has, rather than a logical focus on our true national security threats. So anyway, I just, when I called the senators about the NDAA, I just asked, why are we not, with all this money we're spending on the military is taking money away from our true threats. So that makes no sense. But I mean, it just seems like we ought to be, I don't hear the media talking about this. It seems like one thing we could do is keep this before, keep it on the table.
Right. I think everybody needs to hear over and over again, in particular, the folks who are, there were a lot of Democrats in the House and Senate who opposed Build Back Better, which was nowhere near the amount of money that they then voted for the NDAA. And the F-35 doesn't even fly, let alone protect us from COVID or oppose, do something to slow down climate change. The actual threats that we have are not being addressed by our continued reliance on military manufacturing, and it's something that we need to say over and over again and make sure that we get into the consciousness. Judy, did you still have something you wanted to say? Your hand's still raised, so. I'm going to read Lydia's comment. Sorry that it took me some time to get back to it, Lydia. So Lydia says, I wasn't able to add Deborah's comment because I was driving, but I agree that NHPA needs to be more involved with other orgs. It's great to know you're planning on it. But before I even heard about the communications position, I didn't know a lot about New Hampshire Peace Action. And I should add that Lydia worked out of our office for a year. She worked for the American Friends Service Committee. People don't talk, so we share office space. People don't talk about it much outside of the Facebook page. So getting involved with other orgs will increase publicity and awareness of its actions as well. Chris Hansen has something. So Chris, go ahead, and then I'll get to Judy's comment.
Yes. One of the slogans that has always rung a bell for me is that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. But so much of what we seem to be trying to do is influencing the leaders so that we will follow them where they want to go. And I think that if we could find ways to de-emphasize that the only path to getting the agenda that we want to see in place, that the only path is to go through Congress and the presidency, I think we might feel that we're accomplishing more, or at least expending effort in a more meaningful way. And I think of what's been going on in Yemen for now so many years, and how we've continued to talk and talk and talk. And I remember that in order to stop the supply of the death squad government in El Salvador, Brian Wilson went. He didn't go to his congressman at that point. I'm sure he probably had, but he went and he sat on the railroad tracks, and he lost his legs trying to stop that weapons train. And that, I don't know if we could say that eventually led to the cutoff of aid, but I think that kind of thing contributed more than our calls to Congress and the Senate. And that we should, as Deborah suggested, we should have other organizations, allied in various ways, inviting us to send 10 or 20 members to their events, as I'm sure we do, but they invite us, we invite them, and we should make it a priority to respond to that kind of thing, because getting involved in doing something actual, like I've thought of, well, should we go and do a mass sit-in and hunger strike in Jean Shaheen's office, for instance, till they do something meaningful for Yemen. But there are probably other direct actions that we could take, and maybe they are not going to be in the face of Congress or the president. Maybe they'll need to be in the face of the people in general. But I think we need to look for other opportunities. I know that one of the things that we've talked about and we've done some of is some cultural exchange sorts of things against, well, to try to change the general perception of the countries that are considered our foes, so that the citizens of this country will look upon those other countries in a different way, a more humane way. Maybe those are additional places that we should plan some activity that doesn't always just have to beat our heads against the walls of Congress. And my cat and I are done now.
So the opportunities for direct action are it's hard to know when the time for that kind of courage comes. But I think you're right. We should be looking for those opportunities, Chris. So thanks. So Judy says, not a grand strategic proposal, but I would appreciate NHPA putting out more alerts asking for messages to Congress, letters to the editor, etc., on specific issues as they come up. If you include a link to information, we can educate ourselves and compose our own messages. This is something I would actually act on. That's really valuable. And I hope that with our new staff person, that's something we can get better about doing with more regularity. David says, would you like to say anything about New Hampshire Peace Action's role in coordinating peacekeeping for different orgs in New Hampshire as a kind of intersectional work? And that is something I'd love to say. And so Deborah is one of the co-directors of the New Hampshire Peacekeeping Project with Louise Spencer, which is one of New Hampshire Peace Action's special projects. And we've taken the tradition that I think Arnie really has been a big part of setting up of event peacekeeping, which is it's a very specific. You have people who are marked and they're known. You know who they are, and they know where the bathroom is, and they know what the basic run of show and what's happening at an event is. And their job is to make sure that people who come with the intent to disrupt or people who are being disruptive on our side, who have shown up and their intent isn't to disrupt, but they wind up getting into conflict and derailing actions or events, are diffused with, for the most part, we talk to people in a way where they're feeling heard, and that the goal is not to debate people, it's to make sure that potential disruptions are averted, and that's we just did a training for trainers, and we're hoping to beef up our capabilities there, and I know that AFSC and New Hampshire Peace Action have for a long time been at the forefront of training in these skills and keeping them alive. And I've peace kept for the annual Trans Remembrance Rally in Manchester a number of times, and for Granite State Organizing Project, and a number of different organizations have called on us to do that. And that's something, anybody on this call who wants to be a peacekeeper, let me know, because we've got trainings coming up, and we've got a good roster of trainers at this point who are capable of teaching you how to do that. And it's a skill that is important in supporting the larger progressive movement. And I think it's one that we, as peace and nonviolence activists, are really well suited to. So thanks for raising it, David. And unfortunately, we are just about out of time. Does anybody have anything burning that they want to make sure they get out before we close for the evening? All right. I'm not hearing anything. I want to just say thank you all. I mean, 29 people coming out to hear me and talk with me is really, I'm flattered. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for doing the work. Thank you all for showing up, not just today, but on all the days in between this day and the next time that we talk about what our priorities for the year are going to be. We do this work together, and I appreciate having all of you here working with us towards that same goal of just recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person, regardless of where they were born or the color of their skin or their abilities, or making sure that we're not saying it's okay to kill people because of any of those factors. And I deeply appreciate that none of us are alone in this work. So this conversation series is going to remain free and open to the public. And I appreciate you all being here. If you didn't just make an end of your gift, which I know a lot of you did, feel free to go to newhampshirepeaceaction.org/donate if you want to help support us in this work. I'm going to tell you about our next few conversations. So on January 12th, which is not a Monday night conversation, we're hosting Marcy Winograd, and she's going to talk about how militarism fuels the climate crisis. On January 17th, Martin Luther King Day, Brenda Lett is going to join us. She's going to talk about the road to reparations and the struggle for equity and inclusion in New Hampshire. And then on January 31st, Amy Antonucci, who chairs our events committee, and it was here backing me up today, thank you, Amy, is going to kind of circle back and have a conversation with all of you. I think this is going